Hey dudes, welcome to episode 10. Today we are going to talk about podcast versus radio and which one do you think is better. I know right now the more rock inclined audience are kind of flocking to podcasts, and I'm just wondering how everybody else feels about it just being around, you know? The difference between, podcast and radio show is that, well, with podcast you have, I guess, a bunch of people going on a tangent and talking about a bunch of shit that, I don't know, it gets kind of boring from when I listen to podcasts, because, we're all into rock, we all listen to a podcast, so I get kind of bored when I listen to them, to be honest, and they don't really give me anything interesting to run on with. With radio shows, you get to hear cooler facts, it's more accessible. With podcasts, you usually have to pay for them, and it's just harder to access. With radio shows, you can get them from kind of anywhere where you can access, like radio, like whether it's your car, or, one of those, little boxes, like those old-fashioned ones that I kind of use. But that's kind of how radio show works, like they kind of, and you get included more. You get to call in, you get to ask more questions. With podcasts, you kind of get to do that, but it's not as social. You don't really get to talk as much. Like with radio shows, you can have an ongoing conversation with the host of the show, and it gets personal, it's more fun, and you hear more interesting, it's more raw. I just think it's a way cooler format. So, podcast has pod, and with pod, you think of like, iPods, or just like any of those weird space pods where it's just one person, and it's kind of just like you're to yourself, and it's kind of antisocial. And that's kind of how podcasts are to me, especially because, like I was saying before, you don't really get to communicate with everyone on the show. You don't really get to know anybody, and you're not that involved. Even though you are a viewer, I think viewers just don't get to feel the involvement of the show and be a part of it, which it really should be more personal, but it's not. Maybe that's why they call it a podcast. And with radio, the word radiate, you think of like the waves and reaching and connecting to, all these things around you, and you really get to connect with radio shows, you really do, and you really feel that connection, and you almost are a part of that show, and you kind of almost become like a guest star or whatever on the show, you know what I mean? It's really cool, and it involves multiple people, and a podcast isn't really doing that. And with radio shows, you get to hear, music, like they'll play music for you and stuff like that, and it's just a way cooler, a more, like I said, personal format, and you just really feel like you're hanging out in your backyard with your buddies, and that's kind of how it feels in a radio show. With a podcast, it feels like it's just you by yourself, which it kind of is. You don't know who else is listening. You're not really getting any information on that. And then, you're just, it just feels like you're just enjoying it for yourself or a party of one, and that's not cool. Rock singers tend to flock to podcasts now because it's kind of the 21st century answer to a radio show, and it's kind of the only place, like, it gets more pushed in the community because it's kind of that only place where we can kind of talk and kind of discuss things that are currently happening in the community and get more insight of what's going on with everybody and the bands and everything, and so they can let everybody know what they're up to, because we're a more social crowd, so we have to socialize, and let everybody know what's going on and, you know, hear from the fans and get more included with the community together. There is absolutely no place for rock and roll in this modern world. The modern world is just too antisocial. I mean, why do you think they came up with iPods and podcasts? They came up with that shit for a reason, and I don't know, people don't really want to socialize anymore. They don't want to get to know anybody. They don't want to be personal. They just are kind of up their own ass and only care about themselves. Everyone's too selfish, and they don't really give a shit about anybody else except for themselves. And they don't want to get to know anyone. They don't want to hear anyone's opinions. They don't really care about that anymore. And it's just, this world's just a complete opposite of what represents rock and roll, you know? And it was created in a completely different world from how it is today. So I don't think it could ever exist now. That's why I go back to the past. The internet has affected the rock scene because, again, it does make people less social. And it definitely makes people more antisocial because it kind of is for whatever. It's like a mold. It's like that creature morph from Treasure Island. And the internet kind of forms into different shapes just like that, you know? And it kind of becomes whatever you want it to be. And that's... I can't say it's a good and bad thing, because to me it's just a bad and bad thing. It's really not benefiting anybody. I mean, how are you supposed to exist with just the shit you like? One of the horrible things about this world is that you kind of have to exist with other people, and the internet is helping you exist with only yourself. You know, that's kind of what promotes, that's what it does. And you know, it just feels like a temper tantrum to me. That's what the internet feels like. It feels like somewhere you can just go to yourself and not deal with people because they don't agree with you or have the same outlook of life on you or, opinions. It's like, come on. I definitely have problems with my opinions versus other people's opinions because my opinions are so much more different from most people. But I'm going to deal with it, and I think people just need a deal. And I think me listening to rock kind of creates that more, because with rock, especially because we have so many different kind of subgroups in rock, I think that kind of helps us learn how to, put things under life sucks kind of bullshit, because, like, for example, Nicky had to work on Punk Night at the Starwood, and he had to deal with punk people, you know what I mean? It's like we're not in the same, group, but we kind of have to deal with each other. We're kind of forced to do that. And the way things are now, it kind of separates you. And that creates a problem for the long world. So, the problem with podcasts are that they're not very regimented, and with radio shows, they are, and they're kind of just, podcasts, you kind of march to the beat of your own drum. With radio shows, you kind of have to, like, answer someone else, and it's their show still, and you are still kind of following their guidelines, and, just that. That. And with podcasts, it's too much freedom, but at the same time, there's no freedom in this world. Isn't that ironic?